Hello, how's it going? Good. I am furious because for what feels like the millionth day in a row here in the UK, it's sideways rain, very low cloud, disgusting. Also, I've got a cold, so while I'd much prefer to be outside shooting with any one of these lenses today, I'm not going to. Instead, I'm going to sit here and talk about lenses in general and what I've learned about lenses since starting photography many years ago. Yeah, and occasionally I might have to blow my nose. This video is sponsored by MPB, by the way. More on them later. Right, lenses. There is a famous phrase about lenses that goes something like, sharp, cheap, fast, pick two. And I've got a couple of problems with that as a phrase. Number one, I think it's incomplete. I think you could include the words diminutive, which I use sort of as an umbrella term for size and weight, or lack of size and weight, which I think are important as a photographer. And what was the other one? Versatile. That's the other one I would include. And you can perhaps argue that rather than pick two, it could be pick three. But that's my other problem with this as a phrase, that it's it's pick something to forsake something else. And I think a much more sensible approach when choosing lenses is to accept that there is compromise in all of these things to end up with something that fits your needs, rather than having a sharp lens that's very slow, for instance. I mean, you might want that, but we'll get into this. Right, let's start by talking about sharpness. And the first thing I'll say is that I have no interest, really, in talking about sharpness. When it comes to modern lenses, I would suggest that the vast majority of modern lenses are plenty sharp enough. Their performance is fantastic for most people's needs. And of course, some lenses still perform better than others, but my point is that if the acceptable bar for sharpness and other performance metrics is here, most modern lenses sit way above that. In other words, if there's a problem with your photo, it's very unlikely to be your lens that's the problem if you've got a modern lens. There are just too many good lenses made now for manufacturers to be able to get away with selling and making bad lenses in 2026. Perhaps a controversial way to start this video, but I'm just going to park sharpness and other performance metrics of lenses because I just don't think they're relevant in this discussion. Obviously, if you go and read any review of any lens, performance will be a big part of that review because they've got to talk about something. But I would just argue that performance for pretty much all lenses now is plenty good enough. Right, fast lenses. When I started out photography, like lots of photographers, I was very excited about the prospect of saving up for and buying a fast lens, an f1.8 lens, an f1.4 lens, f1.2 lens, something like that. And that's because I associated shallow depth of field with good, well-considered photography. And of course, in portraiture, in wildlife, in sports, that may well be the case. The thing is, I learned quite quickly that for the kinds of things I wanted to shoot, shallow depth of field was actually not that helpful. In fact, it was detrimental to the kind of thing I wanted to shoot for 99% of the scene to be out of focus. Now, these days, there are definitely still times where I think to myself, oh, it would be nice to have an f1.4 lens for this specific shot. The cost of having that lens, though, would be, weight, obviously, expense, choice paralysis, I would argue. In short, for me at least, I've found that the cost of carrying around bright, fast lenses for the odd shot where I might want them is not worth it. And shallow depth of field can look really quite good, obviously. But in my experience, just like sharpness, if your photo isn't good enough, it's unlikely to be because you've not thrown enough of the background out of focus. Just like it's unlikely to be the fact that it's not quite sharp enough. Ultimately, I think if your photo poses questions, if it's eye-catching, if it's well balanced, well weighted, well lit, then depth of field, sharpness, these things are very much on the periphery, I think. Also, with regard to fast lenses, I will say, one of the reasons that people like to use fast lenses is for low light. The thinking being, if you can open your lens all the way up to 1.2, you're going to let in lots and lots of light, even if there isn't that much light, and you'll be able to shoot at lower ISOs and you'll get cleaner images. That's great, but the cost is obvious. not very much of your scene is going to be in focus, and therefore you're going to be shooting your scene potentially very differently than you would if the light was more abundant. I don't think really there's any need to do that these days, because denoise functionality in various software, Lightroom for example, it's pretty fantastic. And so you can get clean images after you've shot them by running them through software. And of course the advantage of doing that is that you could choose to shoot your scene in the same way you would if it was well lit. And I think that, to be honest, is much more the way to go. So yeah, I mean, there are obvious advantages to shooting with a bright lens when the light is low, but there are costs as well. Let's do cheap at the end. Let's do versatility first. So when it comes to versatility, you might be thinking that I'm talking about zoom range. And in part I am talking about zoom range. I'm also talking about other features though. For instance, this little 90mm Sigma lens I've got, fantastic lens. This is a bit of a pain for me to shoot with because there is no button on the lens, and on all my other lenses I have a button which I typically set up for IAF in my cameras. So if I'm shooting a scene and all of a sudden I want my camera to focus on an eye in the scene, I press this and it does it immediately. And that means when I'm using this lens, everything becomes a bit of a pain because I have to change how I work. So thinking about features like that is really important. Likewise, all of my lenses, all the lenses that you can see here, have an aperture ring on them because I prefer to change my aperture on the ring rather than on a dial on the camera. That's just personal preference, but again, it's a feature that's worth thinking about if you think these features are going to be important to you. But of course, for most of us, when we think about versatility in terms of lenses, certainly zoom lenses, we're thinking about zoom range. And zoom range, as far as I'm concerned, is a double-edged sword in photography, because the greater the zoom range, the better, we might think, except for when it comes to thinking about creative restraints.
Restraints or constraints? I think I'd usually say constraints, but maybe it's the cold muddling my mind. I suppose both can probably work, and it doesn't matter.
And in my experience, creative restraints lead to the best photography. That's certainly been the case for me. And my absolute favourite lens to go out and shoot with is this 40mm prime. Of course, there are times though when I can't shoot at 40mm, which breaks my heart because it's definitely my favourite focal length. But my solution to that is to use a zoom lens and to mark 40mm on that zoom lens, and to always start at 40mm and only zoom when I know that I can't get the shot I want at 40mm. This is my 24-50, but regardless, I have found that that is the best way, for me at least, to use any zoom lens. I start at one focal length, I almost treat the lens like a prime, and only when I know that that focal length won't work for a particular shot will I consider changing to a different focal length. And I've spoken before quite a lot on this channel about the complexities that come with using a zoom lens, and I think some people think I'm a bit mad. Ultimately, using a zoom lens, practically speaking, is not tricky. You just turn the barrel. It's not a particularly difficult thing to do. But when you're learning composition and weighting and spacing, being able to do that is another massive variable that you're adding to the pot. And when you're learning photography, I think sometimes zooming really complicates things. And so therefore, even now, I like to treat zoom lenses, at least in the first instance, as primes. Now, what does that mean in terms of buying advice? Well, I would say that versatility is good up to a point. Absolutely invest in versatility that you need, but no more than you need. And I've got a 24-50 here and a 24-70 here. If I don't shoot much between 50 and 70, there's no point shooting on the 24-70, because very obviously the extra zoom range that I'm not really using ends up being weight. And that's the next thing that we need to talk about. There is nothing that impacts my willingness to shoot more than the weight of my kit. This 28-70 f2 lens that I bought last year, mostly to shoot pictures of my kids, I really love this lens. It's beautiful, but it mostly lives in my house because it's much heavier than this 24-50. Despite the fact that optically I think this is far superior, this is the one I take with me because I shoot with it more and I enjoy shooting with it more. Now, the weight of your lenses really matters, much more than your camera, because as you can see, the lens sits proud of the camera, very obviously, further away from your body, and therefore the weight of the lens has a bigger impact than the weight of the camera on your body. And in my experience, the difference a couple of 100 grams can have across the course of a day on a lens is massive. And again, versatility, speed, typically these things are going to up the weight of your lenses and potentially reduce your enjoyment or your actual shooting time with those lenses. And the biggest lesson I've ever learned about photography is that time out shooting is directly correlated to good photos. The name of the game is to spend as much time outside as possible. There is another saying that goes around about buying lenses, which is data camera, marry a lens. And I think the reason that that's a saying, well, there are probably several, but one of the main reasons that that is a saying is because lenses typically are updated nowhere near as much as cameras. Nowadays, cameras are updated every 2, 3, 4 years. Lenses typically are not, and therefore the lifespan of a lens is typically considered greater than the lifespan of a camera, and therefore it's really worth paying attention to getting the right one for you. And I say the right one for you because if you do it right, you don't need more than one. I mean, I've got several here, obviously, most of which do basically the same job. But the reality, for me at least, is that this one lens could do everything that I need a lens to do for my photography. So as I say, with this lens, and indeed all my zoom lenses, I start at 40mm for pretty much every single scene. And sometimes I go to 35, sometimes I go to 50, sometimes I'm somewhere in the middle. But that is typically where I live for my photography. Then between 24 and 35, I'm using to shoot video for the most part. f2.8 is plenty bright enough for me, and because it's no faster than that, it means that this is a pretty compact lens. In fact, it's no bigger than my 24 f1.4 that I'm filming on right now. In other words, it's the size of a prime. Now this lens is not a G Master, unlike some of the other lenses that I've got, so it's supposedly not quite up to the maximum quality that Sony offer. But going all the way back to my first point, this lens is plenty sharp enough for what I need, even at f2.8, and it's absolutely stellar at the apertures that I typically work at, which is f5.6, f8, occasionally f11. Now, again, there are times where I think to myself, oh, I would really like an f1.4 lens here. And there are also times where I think to myself, oh, it would be nice to go up to 60mm here. But again, as a photographer, sometimes having creative restraints, even introduced through your equipment, is a really valuable thing and making you think much more about what it is that you're trying to achieve. And so for me, basically, this has ended up constituting the perfect lens. It's not the sharpest lens on the market, but it's sharp enough. It's not the fastest lens on the market, but it's fast enough. It's not the cheapest lens on the market, but it's not the most expensive either. It's not the smallest or lightest lens on the market, but certainly compared to my other standard zooms, it's plenty small and light. And it's not the most versatile lens on the market, but for me and my needs, it's plenty versatile enough. And that ends up constituting my advice about buying lenses. Take all of those factors that I spoke about at the start of the video and stick the word enough at the end of them. And that, I think, forms the basis and the parameters that you should use when assessing the value of a lens to you and your work. Yeah, I think that's everything I've got to say. Got quite serious then. Oh, also one other thing I will say, particularly to beginner photographers, and I am biased in this because, as I said, I like shooting what would be considered standard focal lengths, 40mm, 35mm, 50mm. I think those focal lengths are the best place to start as a photographer. It's very easy, just as with shallow depth of field, to think to yourself, well, if I shoot at 16mm, I can make things look really interesting because they're different to how my eye sees the world. Similar with 600mm. Shooting at standard focal lengths really makes you work to find interesting stuff in the world because you can't use visual trickery in the same way that you can with exotic lenses. So luckily, most kit zooms tend to come as standard zooms. So yeah, maybe not the sort of thing that you actively need to think about when you're first shopping around. But learning to shoot with standard zooms, I would say, is a good way to go. Or standard focal lengths. Could be a prime. And using zooms as a prime, that's a good thing to do. as I mentioned. Waffling now. A big thank you to MPB for sponsoring this week's video. You will find this lens and probably all of these lenses on MPB to buy used, and all of the lenses on their site will have been checked thoroughly by experts before being listed on the site, and you can also buy them safe in the knowledge that they come with a warranty. And of course, it's not just lenses. You can buy cameras on MPB as well as many, many accessories too. And over the years, I've saved thousands by buying on MPB, and also I think it's the perfect place to sell kit that you don't want anymore as well. It's a very simple process. You can get a quote for free online instantly. And if you're happy with that quote, then MPB will arrange for a courier to come to your house to collect your kit fully insured. And then once MPB have assessed it, they'll pay you very quickly. It's a fantastic service. I love it. And I'm very grateful for MPB sponsoring this channel. I hope that was useful. And I really, really hope that in the next video, we're outside and that I'm not blowing my nose anymore. Fingers crossed. See you then. Cheers.